hello to anyone joining. We'll do introductions for a little while because I know we've still got a whole bunch of people popping in here. So let me introduce you to the one and only. I never gotten to say that. It makes me so happy to see that. This is Molly Roden Winter, the author of More, a Memoir of an Open Marriage. Ta-da! But Molly, please, I would like you to humble brag, not so humble brag, and tell us about your book and tell us about kind of the launch, what you've been up to since January 16th. Is that right, when it launched?
Right. Yeah. Thanks so much, Danielle. It's been a wild ride. So I was getting a little sense that this book might be a big deal back in, even in the fall. I do have a lovely publicist through my publisher, Doubleday. But he sent out the queries in like August. Who's, to media, who's interested in getting a advanced copy? And he was showing me the list that there were like, I don't know, everybody ranging from, and what boggled my mind was that it was ranging from like the Financial Times to, the Polycurious podcast. That made sense to me. The Financial Times, I was like, what? So the buzz has continued, and it's really spanned a lot of different media and a lot of,
Mhm.
different populations. And I think it's just kind of entered the zeitgeist at this moment in time that's very exciting. And I think it's also, people like to read a story. And so this
Yeah.
isn't a how-to manual, it's not a manifesto, it's my story. And I think that it's speaking to a lot of people because whether you're monogamous or non-monogamous, everybody's got a story and everybody's working through this thing we call life. And I tried to tell my story through this lens of my journey through non-monogamy as honestly as I could. And it's been getting well received. So it's kind of exciting.
I am so happy it's as well received as it is. And I think you're right that, I think for the past year or two, we've had so many news outlets publishing things about non-monogamy, about polyamory, about kind of trends in marriage, trends in divorce. I was interviewed on Newsweek about an open relationship, and I was like, this is not the media, the medium
I
format.
know
Like, this is not
Newsweek,
this.
that's
What is
why.
Newsweek doing? Like Yahoo Life, sure, but Newsweek, okay. And I think what we've been having, I think, for the past year and a half, just so much conversation around alternative relationships, around polyamory. And I think your book, especially for someone who is curious or doesn't feel like they understand how this would work, can't see it, doesn't have anyone in their circle that's in an open
Mhm.
relationship, and then being able to read from someone's perspective, I feel like it's so much easier to get it. Like, oh, okay, I get, especially if, and um, I imagine your target audience is more predominantly female. Correct me if I'm wrong.
That was my what I anticipated, but apparently there are a lot of guys reading it too. So,
Okay. Well, then you know what? Then I'm
but
not
I
in.
don't know, but probably more women. I haven't seen any real like figures to this. I
Right.
don't, it's hard to tell. You don't always know who's buying a book.
It's
They don't
true.
always have the data for that.
That's
But
true. But I felt
yeah,
like it was so relatable to me from, from the standpoint of being a mother. It was so relatable to me as a wife, and of course also as someone who is also in an open marriage. Um, I
I
Yeah, that's it made me so happy. Do you feel like, what is it that you think is happening kind of the world at large? Like, let's say, like looking back the past couple of years, that has made society really ready for this book and ready for conversations about non-monogamy.
Yeah, I think the status quo has been shaken up pretty hard, and I think COVID's a big part of it.
Hmm.
We were all thrust into this, it felt like kind of an upside down world where, what we thought was true was no longer true. And, we didn't really have the same kinds of touchstones that we used to of going to work or sending your kids to school or um, going on a vacation or things of that nature. And I think it brought into kind of stark relief um, a lot of what makes a life, the relationships that we value or the things in our life that weren't working for us. the things we valued and or wanted to kind of expunge and not have to do anymore. So that's one of the things that I think is going on. The other thing that I think is going on is maybe we're just getting a little, I think we're all getting a little tired of polarized thinking in some ways. I know I am.
Mm-hmm.
That that as the two sides, we often call it right and left, but you kind of name an issue and polarization is happening, that there's this on one side and this on the other. I think there is actually a lot more interest in finding common ground than there used to be. And I think people are interested in, everyone, at least in Brooklyn that I know, you know, I have so many of my friends or have children or my children's friends, for example, gender non-binary, as just like kind of part of life at this stage. Um, I'm getting increasingly comfortable with people being non-binary and saying they and things like that. And once you kind of call something as what we thought of as fundamental as gender into question, it's like it kind of calls into question a lot of the things that we thought of maybe as like hard and fast. And I think people are exploring and opening up to like, what are the different ways to be in this world, and what are the different ways we might just kind of have a little more openness to different
Mm-hmm.
experiences and not feel so locked in to roles and rituals and conventions that maybe aren't serving everybody anymore.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. Kind of going back to the polarization for a minute, I'm curious kind of what's going to happen next because one of my personal experience kind of creating content and my personal experience kind of it being in media, and I think you experienced this a little bit too, on some of the media articles about your book, is that polarization. One of the things that causes virality is polarization. My
Yeah.
most polarizing topics and content on TikTok are the ones that go viral. And I think, one of the things that I've also seen, and I'm speaking specifically to the New York Times article and your Wall Street Journal article, I think one of the things is the comment section. And I hope you don't
Yeah.
read it
I,
because
I've gotten a lot better at not reading them.
yeah,
Yeah.
don't read the comment sections. But I think having, something that is causing heated debate and heated conversations also causes virality. And I am curious at what point in time we're going to step away from that and, not be dictated, where our media is not dictated by what goes viral, but like what you can kind of go deep on and truly try and understand. Um, I'm hoping that long form content versus our short form content kind of comes back into popularity so that we can have these more like deep, intimate conversations about these kinds of things.
I hope so too. Yeah. I mean, one, this is just anecdotal, but I think it's representative of maybe something that does happen. I got a comment, or it was an email from my publicist. It got sent to my publicist who sent it to me. And it was a 65-year-old man from Texas who wrote me to say that when I think he read a piece in the Wall Street Journal and thought that I must be a very shallow and promiscuous woman.
Mm,
But then he said, but then I read your book. And you are a mensch, which is, the Yiddish for a good person. And
good
then,
human.
yeah. And so, and then went on to say all sorts of nice things. But I thought part of what fascinated me is that I thought you were a shallow and promiscuous person. So I read your book. You know what I mean? And it's like, I think if the viral aspect, virality, as you said, leads people into to be interested and to seek things
Mm,
out. As long as there is deeper content out there, and I thought a lot about how I wanted to present my story. At first I thought maybe I was just going to write an essay, and then I realized, no, this is a book. This is a journey. This isn't a soundbite. And because I wanted to tell all of the difficulties of those early years. If I had just told that, then you don't get the sense of where I landed. And even as it is, the book ends 6 years ago. And I feel like my relationships to myself and to others have grown quite a bit in those 6 years. But if I had just told where I am now, then you miss out on the story of the journey.
Yes.
So I feel like if people get curious and there's viral content that brings them into the deeper, longer form stuff, fine. And I'm trying to just get comfortable with the fact that, this idea that all publicity is good publicity or whatever, and to not get too, you know, uh, to get too fragile
Yes.
about people who see something that's not really a representation of me and react to it. It's like I've put myself out there and I stand by what I stand by what I stand for, And so it's okay if people are getting upset and triggered, and it's difficult, I think, to look at something that is as, well established as marriage,
Mm-hmm.
and to see it in this new way and to see it being changed. I again, I liken it to some of what has happened around gender, with people getting very upset at the notion that there might be another way to look at gender that's not the way it's quote unquote always been, even though we can look back in time and see in different cultures there have been non-binary people, two spirits in Native American culture, and in other cultures and times, there certainly has been non-monogamy. But it's what we have known as monogamy. So
Right.
it's, it shakes people a little bit, and that's understandable. I don't hold it against anyone for it being shaken. For
I don't either. I think that, we as a society, we do like history is a part of that. When you have been raised doing something that's normal, we've been raised in nuclear families. Like it's just historically what has happened. I'm about to turn 40 and I was raised with this idea of a nuclear family, and kind of trying to disrupt that is going to take time. It's going to take personal experiences. It's going to take a lot of conversations, deep conversations to your point. What are you seeing any trends in terms of, gender, men versus women, or people from different cultures or backgrounds that are feeling more comfortable or are initiating kind of conversations around non-monogamy, or not even necessarily non-monogamy, like alternative relationships and restructuring of that kind of like nuclear family?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there have been a number of books recently, like Other Significant Others. Have you heard
Yes.
about this one?
Love
Yeah.
it.
And that, I mean, I don't know all the places that these ideas are catching fire, but I think because we are really in a global world, to say something kind of redundant, I feel like we're all getting a little more imaginative around how we might structure our lives to be more fulfilling and to be more connected. So I don't think it really has borders. I think, I mean, I've definitely been getting a lot of interest from Australia, but I sometimes credit the Evolving Love project. There's a married couple with a child who have a podcast and a Substack, and um, they've directed a lot of people my way. But Australia can be pretty socially conservative, so that's interesting.
Mm.
You don't always know who you're going to reach and who's going through the same kinds of questions. I really hope you're not hearing the horn outside of I am very Brooklyn. Sorry, there's somebody beeping, beeping, beeping very annoyingly. Um, but yeah, I don't think one of the biggest surprises to me has been that I don't feel like I can pinpoint who my readers are.
Mm.
And that's kind of cool. And I think it's also the case that as we talk about this and make it clear that um, one person or one group of people or one trend, quote unquote, happening doesn't mean that everyone else has to do the same thing. It doesn't mean, and that's I think one of those misunderstandings that redefining how family can work doesn't mean that the nuclear family is not an option anymore. I mean, I still have a pretty nuclear family. I'm married and I have two kids, and we're the ones who are going on our family vacation next week. And, but it is more open than most in that we have these other partners. But I just think choosing your own structure more consciously, making monogamy a choice rather than a default setting is good
Right.
for everyone because it forces us into conversations that are important to have.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that that's my big hope for anyone who kind of reads this book, if you haven't already, as well as I know that Molly just mentioned the other significant other, and I am blanking on the author's name. I will make sure I follow up.
Yeah, I would mess it up too. It starts
Um,
with an R.
No,
That's all
but
I got.
incredible book, The Other Significant Other. And I think like my takeaway from some of these other books that I'm kind of seeing on the market right now is that, yes, I just hope that people feel like they have the freedom nowadays to create a relationship that is unique to the people that are in that relationship and not feeling like they have to slot into a category. And I think we're kind of seeing this desire to remove labels. Like I think we're seeing this in gender fluidity, we're seeing this in kind of the sexual fluidity and change in orientations and not wanting to be in boxes, not wanting to be in categories. And I think sometimes it's hard when you don't have the clear language to describe, like, oh, I am this person. I think it makes it a lot easier for other people to relate. But I love this exercise that I feel like a lot of different people in society are going through, which is like, I am not going to be categorized in a box. I'm going
Yeah.
to figure out my own rules for my relationship. I'm going to figure out my own expressions of my gender. I'm going to figure out my own experimentation when it comes to my sexuality. And I think we're seeing this at a very broad level. And I'm so excited to kind of see where society's at and like where we kind of get to and how kind of our legal structures and our financial structures and insurance structures are going to change accordingly. If they're going to change accordingly, that's probably a very
Yeah.
long way away.
Well, we've got a lot to do with those domains as
Yes.
well. And I just wanted to add too, and maybe we can get to this later. It's something I've just started thinking about even in the last week. I was on actually it's gonna drop tomorrow, the Dan Savage podcast I recorded last week and it's coming out tomorrow. But we ended up, we answered some viewer questions or listener questions, and one of them was about hierarchical versus
Mhm.
non-hierarchical structures within polyamory. And Dan Savage has some strong feelings about it. I was just kind of, I, I'm in a pretty hierarchical place with my relationships, but at the same time, I've been having more conversations with people who are moving away from that. And I think
Mhm.
even that is, when we look at polyamory, the more stories we can get and the more discussion we can have, that is so important too, because I think what we risk as something is just starting to come out of the fringes and into the mainstream is that the singular stories become seen as representative of the whole. And, I'm in
Yeah.
an open marriage, but there's another book I want to mention, which is Entwined by Alex Alberto. I went to their reading in Brooklyn on Thursday, and they write about polyamory and family and the creation of family as a non-binary person, which is very different from how my open marriage looks. And we both identify as polyamorous, but the way our lives
Yes.
look the day to day is quite different. And so just as we want to, as we broaden the conversation, I think it's really important not to get too locked into even saying, what is the right way to be polyamorous? What's better? I'm kind of veering away from these questions of like, is it better to be hierarchical or non-hierarchical? And it's like, hierarchy generally, it doesn't sound great, but there's like the way it looks in practice can be very different from one person to the next. And so I think as we open up these conversations, I think it's also good for us to start digging into some of the nuances and differences among polyamorous relationships
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, agreed. We will go down a rabbit hole if we talk about hierarchy. So I am going to and yes, and sorry, I just had someone talk ask really quickly. So thank you, Caitlin, so much. So the book we referenced, The Other Significant Other by Rania Cohen. My plan is to actually put this video recording on my YouTube channel. In case that takes a little while, I promise to have book links in my Instagram tomorrow on my stories. So I promise to put all of these book recommendations there just in case you missed any of them. And I kind of want to open this up, questions here. So I'm going to ask Molly a couple of questions, but if you want to ask Molly a question yourself, I think maybe raise your hand or throw that question in into our chat, and let's open this up. This is such a fantastic group that we have so far. So
Can,
Molly, go ahead.
can you
Sorry.
still hear me? I think I'm frozen in my video, but can you
Oh
hear me?
no, I can hear you.
Okay, good. Don't worry. I just look like I've fallen asleep in my
You
video.
do look like you fell asleep on us.
I am
What?
awake. I am here. I am awake. Just so you know. I'm gonna go. While you're taking the first question, I'm just gonna grab the book I was referencing so I can show it to folks. Hang on.
Molly, why don't you pause your video for a second and pop back on here? Let me see. I'm going to stop your video and then I'm going to put you back on. Ask to start video. Let's see if we can get her going again. Simon. All right, let's see. Simon, I'm going to have you ask the first question. That'll be perfect. There
I'm
we
back.
go. Molly, she's back.
I woke up.
All right, well, I'm going to
Okay,
go to Simon.
so sort of a two-part question, because how were your family view? Yeah, sorry, my phone decided to go a bit weird. How were your families when both of you told them initially that you were poly? Because I come from a family where my older sister is poly. I told my parents I was poly, and mum's first words were, "Don't we have enough of that in the family?"
Yeah. For me, it was pretty non-dramatic because my parents also had an open marriage. But even that was a little fraught because my mother didn't tell me they were in an open marriage until, my late 20s. She didn't want to tell me. Her sister actually blurted it to me, and then I confronted her when I was about 29. And it took me another 10 years to talk to my father about it. So even in families, I think where there's a precedent, I think it's still tricky. I think parents and children don't quite know always how to talk about sex and sexuality, period, let alone if something less than, perfectly conventional is going on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so my hope is that through, having more stories, having more, hey, mom, maybe you can, look at this podcast, or this book or this article or whatever it is to help people sort of get a sense of what this means, what's possible. And it's going to take a minute. I mean, we also know moms can get a little, uptight about a lot of things. It doesn't have to be polyamory. But I don't know, Danielle, what about your
No,
story?
as a mom, we can get uptight about things.
Yeah, I get uptight with my kids about different things, but I still get uptight, like wearing a
My
coat when it's cold, like stuff like that, which they think I'm very annoying about.
my parents did not react well when my husband and I came out and told them that we were in a non-monogamous relationship and that we had been for a while. I'm thankful that by the time we told my parents, we were very confident in our decisions and we were able to answer the hard questions. It's one of my big recommendations to people before telling parents. Be ready to answer the questions such as all of them, all the hard questions. What happens if someone falls in love with someone else? What do you tell the kids? When do you tell the kids? How to use protection? And I think we were ready to have those conversations with my parents, and we sat down on the couch and answered questions for almost an hour, if not two. Thank God there was a bottle of wine involved. And then afterwards they said, we don't want to hear about this ever again. Like we are going to pretend like we don't know. And it took actually a couple of years, and I think, a little bit for the conversation to change. I think that they also my parents are incredibly supportive and wanted to know more about what was going on in our lives and how we were living our lives. And I think then it slowly became more normal. I remember my mom sending me an article on the Katie Couric website being like, "Oh my gosh, even Katie Couric is talking about non-monogamy and open relationships." Like it's got to be a little bit more mainstream than I thought it was. And so I think has taken my mother years to recognize that just because my husband and I are in an open relationship, it doesn't mean that we don't love each other. It doesn't mean that we aren't creating a stable family. And I think that if I would to give anyone in a couple that is coming out to their parents in any way, shape, or form, my recommendation is be patient, be kind, and just recognize that, changing anyone's opinion is hard. Changing anyone's opinion when it comes to someone they love deeply is even harder. Um, but yeah, that was that was my takeaway. I'm seeing quite a few questions here in the chat. So if anyone would like to ask their question directly to Molly, feel free to just like raise your hand and I'll have you hop on and ask it. And if you don't want to be, this is recorded, so if you don't want to be seen in the video afterwards, then just keep it in the chat and I'll ask it for you. So I'm gonna pop into Aria's question that she asked previously. Oh, there we go. I'm gonna let her do it instead. Aria, go for it.
Thank you so much, Danielle, and thank you, Molly, for sharing your story. This is awesome to see more, different families sharing and different structures. I heard about your book first in the Atlantic article. It seemed like that writer really kind of missed the point of your story, and I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I'm just curious if you can speak to any of kind of like those cultural misunderstandings and like how that maybe influence your search for a book agent and a publisher as someone who is also writing a memoir about open relationships and polyamory and all the things that I was taught not to talk about.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for that question. Yeah, so the Atlantic article you're referencing called, I think you put it in the chat too, a fad of the ruling class. The New Yorker had a similar kind of takedown of this being of polyamory is kind of like the playground for the rich. And in my book, I do talk about going to hotels. They were pretty crappy hotels, but I think there was a belief that I am somehow just like Shiv from Succession, who asked for an open marriage, or the couple in White Lotus who was basically cheating on one another. I felt like I got a little lumped in with some fictional characters who are very wealthy. And, I was a teacher. I'm not like crazy. I'm not like Succession, but we are comfortable and we could afford childcare and things like that. And so one of the critiques has been that in order to have an open marriage, you need to, have a certain amount of wealth so that you can, go on dates and hire childcare. Now, the way I was doing it, sure. But I also wouldn't, the way I was doing it is not like a recommendation. I was also a hot mess for many, many years. And that's part of what I'm writing about. Others, and this is the book I was referencing before, Alex Alberto, Essays on Polyamory and Creating Home. I think Alex's story is representative of a whole movement within polyamory that is very economically wise, really. We're talking about combining the incomes of perhaps 3 adults, of having maybe, there is one of Alex's metamors, or their partner's partner is a single mom, and they're talking about whether or not this person is going to move in with her kids to their house, and they're having all these discussions around it. I mean, that is just about the opposite of what people, like the Atlantic article were saying, that this is, a fad of the ruling class. No. And he got a lot in the comments, I would say, in that Atlantic piece were a lot more about him maybe not having done his research on where the roots of polyamory really come from and who's actually practicing it. So just I do feel, though, that because I do have privilege, I'm not worried about getting ostracized by my family or losing my job. I feel like because of my privilege, I am in a position where I can become a face anyway of polyamory and can speak out without fearing that my whole life is going to fall apart as a result. So in that sense, yes, the stories that have been coming out are probably more privileged stories because of that, because people who are writing to me on Instagram are not in that situation. Women have written me from Alabama and Maine, and they feel like if they were to come out as poly, they could really have some dire consequences in their community. So in terms of agents and publishers and things like that, I did get, rejected by about 50 agents, but that I think has more to do with how terrible my first draft was and the fact that I was querying before I was really ready. But my agent took a chance on me and also helped me really develop my proposal. It turned into a proposal instead of a first draft manuscript. But then I got the rejections I got from publishers. Some of them were very visceral no's. My agent, though, was sending me these no's because he thought it was great. He was like, "Oh, look, you're making people feel things. Even when they don't want to buy it, they're giving 3 paragraphs on why this is so terrible." So I was like, really? Are you sure? Because I was getting a little wounded. And same thing in the UK. I didn't have a publisher. It's coming out in the UK and in the whole British Commonwealth, March 21st. They at first said, oh, this is too American of a story. This is what these New Yorkers do, But it turns out they're seeing that there's a real audience for it in the UK. So as soon as it hit the New York Times bestseller list, then the publishers in the UK came a calling too. So I think my publisher at Doubleday, my editor in particular, I felt like really got it. She's also a mom. She lives in Brooklyn. She knows that what my world is because she's right. She's my neighbor. And so I feel like I had that. I felt like I had just the people I needed in my corner. I got 50 rejections from agents, 50 rejections from publishers, but all it takes is one. And they understood my story and understood what I wanted it to be and what I didn't want it to be. And they also were saying, they had the sense that this was entering the zeitgeist and becoming a cultural moment. So I hope that the trail is blazed for you so that you won't get these visceral no's, and that you will be, it'll be on the merits of your story, not because people think there's not an audience for these stories. So I really do wish you luck. And I think we need more memoirs about this. Just like we've got a million trillion rom-coms about, monogamy. But we need some more stories about non-monogamy. I do believe.
Deborah, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, hi, this is Deborah and Svi. We're a couple here. We opened our marriage in November 2022. And Molly, first of all, I want to say just fantastic work on the book. We both listened to your audiobook. It's just so much easier sometimes to listen. And
Sure. Well, I recorded it, so I have no problem with that.
good. Well, it's great that it came from your voice. And also just for me, I found myself like when I was running, like you would make points and I would just be like fist bumping in the air, like, yes, somebody understands this, somebody understands us. It really has been amazing to have your book come out and be able to point to it for people who may not be understanding. They may support what we're doing, but may not actually really understand the language and understand that it's like you said, visceral, it's personal, and that kind of thing. And so it was actually I'm the one who's fanboying right now, but my wife is the one with actually like a good question.
All right, let's hear it.
For the book. Do you wanna talk?
Yeah, I don't want to make this come across as being like a rude thing to ask.
Oh, it's okay.
As I'm listening, so my husband and I were, I think, both listened to the audio book, maybe at different times, but I felt like some of the choices of people that you dated, I'm in my head, I'm just like, the alarms are going, like, who is this guy? Stop seeing him now. And
Yeah.
like, it took you longer to get there. I was just wondering, like, I don't know, did you have any of those moments afterwards where like, whoa,
Oh, yeah.
I see that earlier?
It was a little embarrassing writing about my horrible decisions,
Yeah.
but Yeah, I've thought about it both as I was writing it and afterwards. And I wrote my book in present tense so that I wouldn't editorialize from my older, wiser self, because I wanted to really show what I was, for one, I personally feel like I was going through my not even a second adolescence. I think it was my first adolescence. I had a very safe, non-exploratory teen and 20s, time of it. I had one boyfriend really before I got married. And so I was not doing crazy things. So, when you see like, oh, what is she doing? It's kind of like you would say about, a 17-year-old. Like, what is she doing? What is she thinking? Yes, I agree. What was I doing? What was I thinking? But I do think I needed to do some of that. I do also believe, though, that if it were today and not 2008, oh, what a difference 15 years can make. In 2008, there was no, you know, ethically non-monogamous in the drop-down menu. There weren't even really the dating apps on phones. You know what I mean? I had a flip phone. It was like I didn't know how to date in a way that was discreet, because yes, I harbored a lot of shame about this and I thought nobody would understand. And I wasn't wrong. My friends were pretty concerned about me, some for good reason and some for like just didn't get what my husband and I were doing. But I think that if I had had other options besides, let's say, an Ashley Madison, or, like, and when I first discovered OkCupid, my husband discovered it first. It was 2015. I mean, we were already 7 years in, and we kept matching with each other. And you were in Brooklyn, where supposedly everybody is polyamorous, but there were not that many people to choose from. And so that was part of it. And I was not necessarily, yes, I could have definitely made better choices, but I think as non-monogamy enters more of the mainstream, it becomes easier to make good choices because, I had never in my life heard the phrase ethical non-monogamy until about 2014. So I didn't even know that was a thing, to find dating partners that were really as open. And I also feel sometimes this is also true that like kink and non-monogamy sometimes in the dating apps get kind of put together. Even though some people read my story and think like, whoa, she's wild, in on the spectrum of things, I think I'm actually pretty vanilla. And so I was having trouble navigating how do I just, I was exploring myself sexually, and I was also trying to find partners that were discreet and not, the fathers of my kids' friends. So yeah, I definitely look back with like, whoa, that was maybe some bad choices, but I also don't have regret because it all led me to where I am now. Does that answer your question,
No,
Deborah?
it really does. And I appreciate you being, yeah, so candid in your book. And I feel like you can really see the growth that you underwent throughout the book. And I feel like there were so many points in the book where I was like, oh, I remember when I was at that point or made that discovery. And I almost felt like I was kind of like reliving my experiences along with you. And yeah, I mean, it is a journey, and there's so much unlearning to do, and you learn so much about yourself in the process. And sometimes it's by, yeah, making mistakes or,
Yeah.
doing things that maybe might kick yourself for, but yeah, it's part of how we grow.
It is. And I opened the book with the Audre Lorde quote, the erotic is the nurturer of all our deepest knowledge. And I think for me, in some ways, I was like wanting to be kind of the anti-good girl. I wanted to be a good girl and I didn't want to be a good girl. So some of these decisions or choices I was making were like, I think deliberately nuts. You know what I mean? Like I was just like, I'm gonna just do this, I was like jumping off the deep end. But part of me needed to set myself free in that way in order to get to a more middle ground, because I had been so contained for so many years. I think I needed to swing in the other direction before I could come back to someplace closer to, normal, or not normal, but you know what I mean, a little more measured, a little more balanced.
No, yeah, I can really relate to that. So thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you for sharing.
thank you so much. Yeah, we really appreciate it. And that's the thing, like another thing that people don't see with the polyamory is like the part that isn't about sex, the part where your external partner might come to help babysit and might come to, might help to, in a pinch, like it's really part of something that is a respectable, like kind of, love. And that part is so much more deep when people make assumptions about what polyamory means. It's just so different for so many people.
Yeah, and my past 6 years have a lot more of those relationships that are more enviable and and supportive. So in the book, I made a decision to tell the story of how I got kind of from a place of feeling like it was an experiment to really kind of identifying as polyamorous. But the book cuts off before I get into the other stuff that happened, but there will probably be at least one more book.
We would definitely buy it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Molly. Thank you. We'll leave it for other questions out. Thanks.
So one of the sorry, I'm just going to comment really quickly before I get into Elliot's question. But Elliot, I'm going to ask your question next. I think the pendulum swing that you described, it sounds like Deborah and oh my gosh, I'm not going to pronounce your name correctly. I'm so sorry.
Zvi.
Zvi.
Yeah.
So Deborah and Zvi were also talking about like that pendulum swing, I think is really important for anyone's journey. I had it as well. Like I had this wild phase and, about a couple of years into our open relationship where I kind of went nuts. And I think that, and I'm not proud of those moments, but I think that I think that sometimes when we think about our journeys, it's allowing ourselves to get a little bit off balance is important for being able to recognize like, okay, where is balance? Where is that part where I am truly in balance with myself, with my relationships, with my family, with the people I care about and I nurture. And I think sometimes, you take it for granted. You don't have gratitude for what you've truly built and established in a relationship until you're completely off kilter. Until you're like, oh, I look back and I'm like, oh God, that was nuts. Yeah, no. But I learned a lot, learned a ton. And kind of coming into Elliot's question then on this one. So Elliot was asking, what advice for marriage, getting into poly, and I think, Molly, I'd love to hear your advice in general for someone opening up a relationship and exploring polyamory. And I'll speak really quick to Elliot's question, which is like, what happens when one partner is not fully interested or not willing to explore polyamory, or one person's polyamorous and one person's monogamous. And Elliot, I think this is kind of going back to what Molly and I were saying in the beginning, which is like, I'm hoping we're getting into this point where you get to create a relationship that is specific for you. And I think that, and I have personally seen relationships where one person is monogamous and one person is polyamorous, and they make it work because they figure out what are their wants, what are their needs, what are the desires, which ones are met in their relationship, and which ones are they meeting outside of their relationship in different ways. And sometimes those are sexual, sometimes those aren't. And I think it's like really around having two or more people in the relationship kind of figuring it out together, because it's relationships, it's not dictators, it's not establishing like these are my rules and now you have to adhere to them. It is figuring this thing out together. And I know that there's been a couple of like recommendations there in the comment section, but that's always kind of my 2 cents. Is like, I think moving away from the labels and figuring out how to make it work for you kind of on your own terms, and taking a step back from the labels and saying like, what do I want for my relationship? What do you want for your relationship? And where's kind of that common ground? But Molly, yeah, what is your recommendations for anyone kind of exploring non-monogamy, exploring polyamory, especially if it's for the first time for both of them?
Yeah, I mean, there are kind of 2 different scenarios. I was just looking at the question, somebody when one person is more enthusiastic than the other, my recommendation is the least enthusiastic person goes first and sets the pace.
Yes.
But if you've got a situation where one is not even interested in exploring, I mean, I think that's a time to really look at what are we getting from this relationship? So if somebody who is wanting to explore polyamory, to figure out, are there things in this relationship that do feed you in some important way, that you do really want to preserve? And if so, then you might need to, just really, as Danielle said, talk about it. But I also don't feel like it's an automatic, like, no, if because I too have seen it work. It's worked in some cases, I think, where one person is feeling like way less sexual interested in sex than the other person. But I'm sure there are other scenarios for that as well. I also know sometimes there are people who, like my current boyfriend, for example, his wife lives in another country, but he doesn't really date outside of me, but he's got a lot of other things he likes to do, you know? And he wants to have freedom in his life that may not take the form of sexual relationships. So I think it's helpful sometimes in a partnership to look at, where do we want more freedom in our lives?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe one person wants more sexual freedom, and maybe what the other person wants, they're not actually looking for that, but maybe there's some other way that you can gift them some freedom that they do want. Because it doesn't, I think about my younger son's school, which is a school for kids with learning issues. And they would always talk about, equitable doesn't necessarily mean equal.
Yeah.
When everybody's getting what they need, if everyone's getting their needs met, then that's equitable. But the way those needs are met doesn't have to be identical, but it is something that needs to be talked about. Because we do have this kind of default setting that, like, monogamy is the right way. And if you don't want to if one person wants to and the other person doesn't, that it's not going to work. But we also know there are other, there are certain ways that it's difficult. Like if one person wants kids and the other one doesn't, those things are hard to figure out. I feel like that's a harder one actually than monogamy, than one person being monogamous. So, yeah, keep having conversations and just try to get at the root of what it is you need and what it is you get from one another.
I don't want to, I think kind of to this point, the main example that I've often seen personally that works very successfully, when one person is polyamorous and one person is monogamous, is especially when there is a sexual need that one person wants to have kind of in their lives and the other person does not feel comfortable meeting. And it's such, and I don't want to say that, a sexual need is the only way, or a kink is the only, like the only functioning example, but I think it makes so much sense to a lot of people when you frame it this way. It's like, okay, this person, in order to feel like they truly get to express themselves sexually, is this one particular thing, but they're in love with someone who doesn't enjoy that one particular thing. And it's really simple, but and it's very easy to have that conversation. Like, okay, great. I want you to experience that. I want you to be happy. I want you to have that in your life. And it does not have to be with me. And Elliot, before I move on, and before we jump into the next question from Nicole, I didn't know if you wanted to come in here and kind of follow up in any way. Please feel free to unmute and do so if you would like to.
Yeah, I think a lot of that makes sense. I'm the one who is the monogamous one. And so I just got married to my fabulous wife, and she kind of threw that curveball into the relationship, and kind of me trying to understand from her perspective, but also wanting her to do whatever she wants and be happy and healthy and fulfilled and free to live her life. But I don't know if the polyamory is for me on my side, but wanting to kind of figure out, like, is that acceptable? Is that okay? Like, I want her to be as happy as she possibly could be, and me being her primary partner and building her up and supporting her through everything, but just kind of, it's very new to me, and I grew up in a very conservative family where it's like polyamory has been very taboo and against everything. So it's kind of me relearning and trying to be willing to relearn kind of new standards, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can see why she wants to be married to you.
Same.
That sounds like real love. And I would also say it's fair, when you say you just got married, I think it's also fair to say, listen, can we spend some more time connecting to each other before we take this leap? Because, I was married for 9 years really before we opened up. And I don't know that there's any magic number, but I do think that if you're not feeling ready yet, again, it's like the least enthusiastic person
Mm-hmm.
sets the pace. And everything you're saying to me it sounds like you want to give her what she needs. It doesn't sound like you're trying to be withholding or spiteful. It just sounds like you need a little time.
Yeah.
So I think that's really fair to ask for and to say, I want to give you these things that you need and want, but I just can I have some time to catch up, and can we make sure, like, just trying to establish, like, what are the things that are going to be, how are we going to stay connected?
Mm-hmm.
Because that can feel, that can bring up a lot of insecurity. My biggest rule with my husband now, I had a lot of rules at the beginning and then they all fell away, and got replaced with the one rule that, like, you can do what you want, but when I have feelings about it, you have to help me hold those feelings.
That makes sense.
I think it's also like, if you say, okay, even if to say, like, all right, how about if I, and you guys can work this out together, but even saying, like, if you go out on a date with someone else, for example, can we make sure we're spending a few hours together afterwards where I can really be held in this way, not physically sometimes, just because I think sometimes what we think in polyamory is like, oh, it's going to be easy, and if it's not easy, there's something wrong. But most things that are worthwhile are hard. And I think it's important to give everybody has the right to their feelings. And it doesn't mean that she has to feel guilty. If you give her permission and she does something, but you have feelings about it, that's normal, and she can help you deal with those feelings. I think what was hardest for me was this idea that I was supposed to let my husband do things and then not have feelings about it. Still not going to happen, even 15 years in. I still have feelings about it, but now we're like so much more efficient with handling it. But at first, it was, for years, it was hard.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. Thank you.
But it'll bring you closer if you talk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would add, there's no timeline on being open. I think especially when you're starting out, I used to joke that it's like you get to decide, do you want to be open every Thursday on the months that begin with the letter J? Like there's absolutely no rules saying, like, okay, we're open starting now and this is what that looks like and it goes on forever. I think relationships are constantly evolving, they're constantly changing. And I love this rule, Molly, because it's so indefinite. It's so, it really allows that relationship to evolve and allow the people to have the feelings as they happen and kind of adapt to each other's wants and needs as the relationship goes on. But I think especially like being new to this, that would be my one thing. I agree with Molly. Go at the pace at the person who is kind of moving the slowest and adapt, and working to adapt. But also there's no timeline. You can be open and close up tomorrow. You can decide to never be open. It can be a conversation that lasts for 5 years. I've talked to a lot of couples that talk about being open for years before they ever take the first step together. And so I think the fact that you have a relationship that is clearly so loving, and so supportive, and that fact that you want your partner to be happy, that is my personal definition of love. And then the fact
You're
that,
a mensch.
there's no hiding. Yes.
Sorry, go
All right, we're
ahead.
just gonna sit here and applaud Elliot all day. But I want to pop
Thank
over
you.
to Nicole. I want to pop over to Nicole and let her ask her question. Okay, I will I'll ask her I'll ask it for her. And Molly, I'm gonna pop a little bit back into your book and talk I can't give away too much of the endings or anything, but advice or encouragement for dating. So I know that you were kind of talking about how different it was in 2008 when kind of in dating in the age of Ashley Madison and Tinder compared to today, where there are apps that allow you to be more upfront and transparent about your relationship. I mean, I've used #open, which even allows me to say like, what is my structure, and what are my rules and what am I looking for? And like, what are my parameters when dating someone who else is non-monogamous? And so I would say like, yeah, based on your experience, based on the red flags we already talked about, what is your dating advice?
Yeah, well, I think two things come to mind. One is, yes, using an app where open or non-monogamous is in the drop-down menu. I think that's good. OkCupid has been my go-to, but I'm sure at this point there are others. I haven't been on the apps for a couple of years now. But the other thing, and I'm saying this like sometimes I'm a little self-conscious because sometimes I feel so Gen X. I don't know how old you are, Nicole. And sometimes I say things like what I learned, and people like women who are like 31 are like, oh my God, you just figured that out. But yes, I did. I figured things out very late. But let me just tell you, one of the things I found is that on those apps, women often get inundated by messages. And because it becomes kind of a full-time job, just sorting through the wheat from the chaff, separating, and you start to feel like these are your choices, right? All the people who messaged you, because there might be a gazillion. Guess what? You can make your own choice. You don't even have to, like my favorite relationships, my most long-standing relationships, I won't say all my favorites, but like some of my very best relationships, they were too busy. They weren't like actively on the apps all the time. I found them. I had my own criteria for what I was looking for, and I wrote to them. And what I gather, even for younger people, is like it's often still, seen as like the women just are in a more passive role on the apps. And I would highly recommend, being a more active participant. I do think the apps are more where it's at. It depends on what city you're at. There are things like in New York, there's a thing, poly cocktails, which a lot of people I know are super into it. I've just never done it because I don't know. As they call me now, I am polysaturated. I can't meet more people. But I think finding meetups for poly people is a cool thing to do. I think there's more options for that online too, which is still kind of like an online rather than in real life. But be an active seeker rather than just a receiver. That's my biggest advice.
Be bold. I think
bold.
it's my number one piece of dating advice. Like if you're interested, go after it. What's the worst that could happen? You get rejected. It happens to men all the time. And I think that we have kind of, I mean, again, I don't want to age myself. I'm like very conscious the moment you said that, Molly. I'm like, oh,
you're young. You're like a lot younger than me. So you're
fine. But I mean, I think I still have friends that they're like, oh, if he's interested, he's going to approach me. And I'm like, whatever, who cares? Like, if you're interested, approach a person. And I think that especially when you frame it in a way, it's like, if you're interested in someone and going up and being like, hey, I'm interested, I'm in an open relationship. If you are monogamous and that doesn't work for your relationship, then I hope you take this as the compliment that I intended to be. Because everyone loves knowing that they've attracted someone else. Everyone takes it as a compliment. No one has ever walked up to me like, hey, you're gorgeous. Can I have a date? And I'm like, sorry, I'm not like, thank you, but no, thank you. I still take it as a compliment. And yeah, be bold, go after what you want. And I think that's whether that's a man or whether it's the type of relationship that you want. And I think that would be my other piece of advice. crafting the type of relationship that you want to be part of, that is going to help you live your best life in partnership with someone else that's going to help them live their best version of their lives. And I think that that's just like, that's the thing I love the most about being in an open relationship. And Simon is asking on this note, so as a woman, how do you find a guy that's actually, you know what, Simon, jump on back in here. If you want to.
Hey, yeah. So I find on the apps that the only matches I ever get are the blooming bots or the people, on field. Oh yes, I'm also on this really dodgy website. Um, and my current early stage connections have come from TikTok, where in the last week or so I've made quite a strong connection with a female dom who, which is interesting. And from a Facebook poly group, which again is something that I've been talking to this person for a few months, but now, it, again, very recently, it's taken a bit of a turn and got a bit more. But on the apps, I just don't know how a guy stands out and still goes, look, I am a poly person, because it either feels like you're constantly writing a profile to say, I'm poly, that doesn't mean I'm a slut. Or, I'm looking for love, but possibly with more than one person, as opposed to just wham bam, thank you, ma'am, as some people see it as soon as they see poly.
Yeah, I feel like it's helpful to say what I always looked for was somebody who had experience in non-monogamy, somebody who was not brand new to it. But then I would always make exceptions too, because people can seem super sweet. But I do think I always responded to someone who really clearly had read my profile, and I think I think it's worth spending a little time, if you are doing it the apps, to spend a little time on your profile. Like my opening line, like it was like your self summary. Mine was like, I'm a good egg. And my husband made fun of me. He was like, who's gonna want, you know what I mean? But then like my boyfriend, who I've had for 3 years, he loved that I said I'm a good egg. And then he just riffed on eggs in his, you know what I mean? And it was like, you find your people this way. To your point too about going up to people, I have started, this is my new thing, wearing this, it's a poly symbol. It's the
Mm-hmm.
heart. This is, my friend makes these. It's called Go Team Light. And she also makes like plastic ones that are pretty cheap. um, this one is like the plated, you know what I mean? They go up in range, and this is the small one. They're men's ones too, or larger ones too. It doesn't have to be for men. But I kind of like this because I'm like wearing my wedding ring, and then I've got my poly ring, and I feel like I'm kind of trying to start this as a trend, perhaps, so that we don't have to be in the shadows. It can just be like,
Yeah.
we look at people's left hand to see if they're married. Like maybe we should look at their right hand to see if they're poly. I think that would be nice.
I
So
used to have,
help me spread the gospel. Go
oh yeah.
team rings.
I used to have a pair of, before the flag changed, I had a pair of poly earrings. And so now the flags changed, I wear my rainbow earrings. But it was so wonderful having like kind of the poly earrings that I could wear for a while. And people definitely noticed.
Poly sees poly.
Poly sees poly. Yeah, exactly. And I think that, I know, echoing your sentiment, your recommendation earlier, but finding events, I think is really important. And Simon, I'm not sure where you are in the UK, but there are a ton in London, a ton in Brighton. And I've found like you meet your people. It's like you really definitely yeah, you when you connect and you can meet your people. But I love this. I love that there's like jewelry now. It's like you can show it off.
Yeah, please put a link to that, to your friend's thing for those rings, because that looks awesome.
Okay, cool. Here, send chat to everyone. Here, I'm going to write 2 things. So go team light.
And I'll put all of these on Instagram tomorrow. I'll put these
Oh,
up.
okay. So we'll work it out later then. All right.
Yeah. Let's definitely promote this. I love it.
Okay, the rings
The
This
rings, the books.
takes a village.
Molly, do you still experience jealousy? You've been doing this for a long time. Do you still experience jealousy?
I do. I do. Like, this past week, I did not see my husband very much. My boyfriend's been in Australia for 2 months. I have another partner who's with his kids all week this week, and my husband was very busy doing other things and then ended up seeing his girlfriend, but we hadn't had any time to connect. And I got very jealous and pouty, but I told him, and he was very reassuring and let me know that, he's on a work trip now, but as soon as he comes back, we're going to do something special or whatever. It's just like, when I get jealous, I can now say that this is it. And then he can offer something to me, whether it be reassurance or like a plan or, touch or whatever it is. But I think it's really normal it's like saying, oh, if you've been married for 24 years, you're never going to get angry anymore. Yeah, I will. Or you're never going to like have a misunderstanding. Yes, we will. But we're just better at managing it. But I don't think the goal is to never have another negative feeling ever. That's not the goal in life. The goal in life is to feel your feelings, work through them, support each other in it, and learn something in the process and grow as a result, not to just like, let's just be happy forever, always, because stuff's going to come up, stuff's going to happen, whether you want it to or not. And it's important to just learn how to manage difficult feelings together, I think.
Do you feel like it is your responsibility to solve jealousy and jealous feelings and big emotions? Or do you feel like it's a joint responsibility between you and your husband?
I used to think it was on me. And so I would stuff down the jealousy, and instead it would just morph into anger. And that went on for quite a few years. But now I do see it as like, it's the price of admission, right? We both are doing this, and he gets jealous too. There's like if I want to go to a restaurant with my boyfriend, but it was something he wanted to go to, I'm like, is it okay? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He gets upset more about like things that we were going to do that we didn't get around to yet. And I want to do it with somebody else. But it's both of our responsibility. I don't want to hurt him, but I also know that him feeling a certain way isn't my fault per se. But it is, I take partial responsibility for his emotional health because I love him.
I'm trying to figure out the like how to articulate this and like what that balance is, because I do think that I am responsible for my emotions. Like I think that I don't think I can control my emotions. I think like they are chemicals going through your brain. Like there's no control. But at the same time, I feel like it is on me to understand and manage my emotions. It's like, where did this come from? Have I articulated it? Have I taken actions to communicate with my partners, why I'm feeling this way? And have I taken actions to put myself in situations and us in situations to better handle it in the future? And I think one of the things that happens in a relationship is when someone cares about you, they care that you're feeling jealous. When I'm feeling jealous, when I'm feeling upset, my husband cares deeply. And although it's not his responsibility to change, like it's not his responsibility to fix that, the same way it's not my responsibility to fix his emotions, we care about each other. And I think when you truly care, you take action, you change, you figure it out, you communicate better. And I'm trying to figure out like what that is. Like, is it a balance? Is it just like a partnership?
I think partnership is a great word for it, if I may interject here, because I think
Yeah.
what I take issue with is when I hear someone say like, well, this is your problem. You're jealous. Get over it. That's not very loving, I just have to say. So it's also not loving to say, I hate you for making me jealous. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I've done that too. It's like our best selves don't always show up in our relationships, obviously. In fact, I feel like sometimes the strong relationships, our worst selves are allowed to show up.
Because
And
you're loved.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's about committing to the conversation. So that's back to my old rule. Like it used to be that I would get angry. I would give my husband permission to do something, then get angry about it, and he would get defensive and say, "You can't be angry. You gave me permission." And I'd say, "Fuck you. I am angry." And it wasn't going anywhere. Now I can do the work you were talking about, Danielle, recognize, oh, this isn't actually anger. This is jealousy, which is a mask for my insecurity or my needing for attention or my, I'm going through some stuff and I haven't had time to talk to him about this completely other thing that's going on with me. And then I can say it and he can hear it,
Yes.
And if it does come out as anger initially, we can stick with it until we get to what it's really about.
Yeah.
But that takes time. I mean, we've been married for 24 years, and so I feel pretty good about our skills at this point. But I still do get jealous.
Yeah. I love this example though. You get to be your worst self a little bit in front of your partner. And it's sometimes I'm not going to bring up hierarchy, but sometimes that's how I kind of think of the differences between my husband and my boyfriends or girlfriends that I'm dating. And I compare it a little bit to motherhood. The things that I said to my mother as a raging teenager were awful. And I am terrified. My daughter's 6. I'm like, oh God, what is she going to say to me when she's 16? But she's going to be able to say whatever she wants because I think she knows how deeply loved she is. The same way that I felt so deeply loved by my mother that I could say awful things that I'm genuinely embarrassed about.
Yeah.
But I think the same happens in my marriage. I get to say things to my husband that I could probably not get away with to a boyfriend.
Yeah.
Or at least not yet. Like I have not yet been in a relationship with a boyfriend where I could show up as my worst self and know that I would still be loved at the end of the day. And I'm curious, Molly, are you to that point if you've been with someone for 3 years? Because it sounds like you can show up with your full authentic self to your husband.
Yeah.
Are you at a point where you're able to do that with boyfriends as well?
Yeah, I am. It's pretty great. And I'm kind of like, and this second partner I have now, or additional partner, we started dating a couple years ago, but I put a stop, like we put a pause on sex for like 8 months in the middle of it because I was like, I wasn't feeling as connected as I wanted to. And I wasn't sure if I was going to come back to that, but our friendship was important to me and it was important to him. And then it kind of grew again into something more, which is really cool. But yeah, I'm kind of like, I only want to bring my most authentic self. Now, it's a different level. My husband has known every last bit of me for about half my life now. And so that's going to be different than someone I've known for 3 years or for 2 years or, for 2 months for sure, or on a second date, So it's more about gradation, but it's like if I don't see a pathway towards being my fullest worst self, like if I don't feel like I could really get angry or really like cry, I'm a crier. I I can't be with someone who's not going to be able to handle that. And you don't
Yeah.
know until you
Yeah.
test a little bit. You might test it a little bit before you test it a little bit more. But yeah, I think it is possible, and it's an important thing for me in my
That's amazing.
relationships.
Yeah, I have it. I think one of the things that for in the early days of opening up my relationship, I think the wants, the needs and desires that I had met outside of my relationship were more physical and experiential
Yeah.
based, and I think what's interesting for me, and I don't know if this has to do with age or it's just that I'm looking for something different, but I think now, I really tend towards emotional connections with the people that I'm dating. But it still doesn't mean that I don't get that kind of escape. I think for me, for motherhood, like there's
Yeah.
this sort of like mental vacation that gets to come when you have a boyfriend that is a little bit separate from the logistics and the finances and the scheduling and the, oh my gosh, we have been with each other through so much that you kind of, that in my case, I get to be like a slightly lighter version of myself with some of the people that I'm dating. And I find deep value in that. You know, I
Sure.
get that kind of that little bit of a mental vacation. And I think that that was a big part of my why I'm in an open relationship for long periods of time. And I feel myself kind of starting to evolve. Like I'm evolving now to something a little bit different that is closer to that true authentic self with multiple people. And I already am my true authentic self with my best friend, you know, and with my husband. It's why I loved that book that Rania Cohen that we'd mentioned, The Other Significant Other, so much, because I was like, oh my gosh, I have these two people in my life. But it's interesting to me as I'm starting to be able to be that more authentic version with a boyfriend or possibly a girlfriend someday.
Yeah. So cool.
It's cool. It is fun. And I think that what I wanted to say kind of to the group is that you get to have lots of whys. You get to have lots of different things that you get to seek and experience outside of an open relationship. And what Molly and I were saying in the beginning, there's no right way. You get to do it in lots and lots of different ways.
You can make mistakes.
Yes.
Okay. My big thing is like, just try to pay attention so you can learn something and you're not just doing mistakes for the hell of it, you know, but you could do everything, you know, by the book and not pay attention and not learn, or you can make mistakes and not pay attention and not learn. Like the important part to me is pay attention to how you're feeling, to how, you know, what is feeding you and what is not.
I mean, some mistakes are more fun than others, not gonna lie. But on that note, Molly, is there anything that you would have done differently in hindsight?
Woo. It sounds so corny, but no, just because I love my life so much right now. And, you know, I'm a believer in the butterfly wings and all of that. Like, I don't know if I had shifted anything. What if I didn't land right where I am right now? That's a scary, scary thought. I mean, no, there's more than one way to be happy and fulfilled. And I'm not like happy all the time. As I said, I'm still a crier. I still go through feelings, but I'm never bored and I can feel the growth always. And I like it. I like it.
I'm going to quote you back to you, which is the deepest learnings were hard won. And I think that that's such an important thing to think about when we think about our open relationships is like the things that work for you, they often take mistakes and hardships and tough conversations and oh shit moments to get to a point where you're like, yeah, okay, that's how I had to learn that thing.
Yeah.
Well, this has been absolutely wonderful. So I think we've got time for maybe for one, possibly two more questions from our group on this note. But I think we're definitely going to start wrapping it up. So if anyone else wants to pop in here and have a question, like raise your hand and just go for it. And I am going to do really quickly oops, I think I just froze. There we go. I'm going to do a couple of shameless plugs. So if anyone is in the New Jersey, New York area, Molly and I are going to both be at the Residence 11 Desire Summit, April 13th and 14th. So 20% discount code using Danielle. The link is in my bio. I think Caitlin's going to pop it into the chat here as well. It's also on my website. So we are going to be chatting with a huge group of amazing people about open relationships, about desire, about non-monogamy, about
A lot of
yeah,
kinks.
all the things. And I know Caitlin's
I'm not leading the kink session, but I will attend.
I'm not leading the kink section either, but I will be there. Like
I will listen.
So my TikTok, I know my TikTok just actually died. So sorry, Caitlin. The whole phone dropped there, please. So my whole phone dropped off. But yeah, so we're gonna be chatting at Desire Summit. So all these links are gonna be on my website. They're also in the bio and my profiles. The link to also buy more if you haven't already is on my website, also on Molly's website, which is mollyrodenwinter.com. Is that correct?
Correct.
Awesome. And then all right, so if there's no other questions. All right, let's see. I'm going to give it a little bit more time for anyone to pop in here and ask some questions. Otherwise, guys, this has been so wonderful. Thank you so much for being here.
This was so fun. Thanks, Danielle.
Oh my gosh, Molly, like I love the book. Recommend it to so many people. Simon is asking is if on the 21st of March, the audiobook will also be available in the UK.
I'm guessing. So it's coming out with Ebury, Ebury, that it's part of Penguin Random House UK. Oh, and somebody wants to know the name of the conference. It's the Desire Summit. It'll
Yes.
be on Danielle's Instagram, TikTok tomorrow.
Yeah. So if you don't already follow me, it's Openly Committed. Oh, I don't even think I gave myself an introduction, but I'm Openly Committed at on TikTok and on Instagram. I've also been, oh my gosh, I didn't do this at all. I've also been in an open relationship for 14 years, married for 10. I share tons of links and recommendations across all of my content. I'm going to do a shameless plug, which is for anyone who's new to non-monogamy. So Israel and Elliot. So I actually have a group that is starting most likely the first week of April. So far, we are about 8 people. So I've got space for about 12 more of people who are new to non-monogamy and kind of want to figure out a whole bunch of stuff together. And so there's kind of a course, there's a whole bunch of workshops that we'll do together, and also just a group of people to ask questions and kind of figure out things together. So if you're interested, please just feel free to message me, email me. Again, it's Openly Committed, spelled like this, on Instagram and TikTok.
Oh, you put an extra L in there.
There we go. Oh, thank you, Caitlin. Oh, I did put it. Yeah. Thanks, typing. So yeah, this has been, and please feel free to message me with anything. I'm very good at responding to direct messages, especially across Instagram. Also, my email address is opencommitment@gmail.com. Molly's website is mollyrodenwinter.com. But yeah, I'll put all of these links, I promise. I'll do all these links into thanks, Caitlin, into Instagram. And I think I actually get to send a follow-up to everyone who subscribed to this event. So how about I do that as well? When this goes up on YouTube, I will send out an event. I will send out an email to everyone that subscribed with kind of the links to everything here, as well as the link on YouTube. But Molly, I loved this. It was just as much fun as I knew it would be. So thank you so much.
Finding me. We found each other on, well, I joined TikTok because my publisher told me I had to. And I immediately started following Danielle, and it's the only wonderful thing that's come out of TikTok for me.
Oh no.
No, nothing bad has happened. I'm just very lazy on it, but like, I'm so glad to have found you.
Oh my gosh, this has been so wonderful. All right, guys, everyone, thank you so much for being here. Have a wonderful rest of your evening, no matter where in the world you are. I know our UK attendance, this is late night for you.
Oh yeah, seriously.
Goodness. All right, guys, have a wonderful night. Thank you again. Bye.
Bye, everyone.